Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Olli Alohniemi and I'm the Managing Director of Waste Energy, which is a waste-to-energy company in Western Finland, here in Vaasa. I'm glad, delighted and honored to be here today with all of you. Glad to see so many faces physically, finally. Happy to see you here and also you online. I'm sure that we are going to have a very interesting 2-hour session ahead of us. As we know, Europe and Finland has set ambitious goals towards decarbonizing waste value chain. In Finland, so-called Green Deal agreement is on the table, meaning that the actors in waste management value chain and state are about to access to a contract. This would mean a long-term clarity for the big investments we have ahead of us to achieve these climate and recycling targets. Nonetheless, there are big challenges ahead. Emissions must be cut by at least a third, the uptake of recycled plastics increased, and new carbon capture solutions built. How can we reach these targets, and how can we increase our carbon handprint globally at the same time? Well, these are the topics we are going to discuss during the following minutes ahead of us. We have more than interesting catering today. First, we are privileged to listen what Kati Ruohomäki, Chief Policy Advisor from Confederation of Finnish Industries, has to say about the increasing urgent energy transition that is accelerating further as a result of this unfortunate war and instability in Europe. Next, we are honored to hear about the role of waste to energy in building a climate-positive economy, as Mr. Oras Tynkkynen, Senior Advisor in Finnish Innovation Fund Sitra, will enlighten us on the matter. Then we will get some news from Norway. Jannike Bjerkås, Director CCS at Fortum Oslo Varme, with Markus Håle, Public Affairs Manager, will tell us about the efforts they have done in Norway to build a full-scale CCS project. They are without any doubt the trailblazers of this sector today in the world. Then last but not least, Juha Ripatti, Head of Business Intelligence at West Energy, is proud to present the newest chapter in Vaasa Energy Cluster Cooperation, the Energy Sampo CCO project. By 2025, the partners together will build the next generation power-to-gas value chain that will drastically reduce emissions, replace huge amount of fossil diesel with clean LNG, and create opportunities for global clean tech exports. Well, these are just the short topics of the presentations. I can't wait to hear and see what they will present to us today. I'm sure that there will be also very interesting discussions. So without any more chit-chat or delays, I will leave the floor to the moderator and the speakers. And to you all in the audience, please just sit back, enjoy, learn, and get involved. Juha, please lead us through this interesting session. Thank you.
Thank you, Olli. So also on my behalf, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, a warm welcome to this seminar. Olli already had the pleasure of introducing me as well, but in any case, my name is Juha Ripatti. I work as Head of Business Intelligence at West Energy, and my main task in our company is the strategic development projects that lead us to the future. But I'm not the star here today, at least not yet. So let us begin with the first of our excellent presentations. The question is, the world is changing very quickly. It's a fast-paced transition towards decarbonization, towards sustainability. How can we, as the industry that builds and creates these solutions, keep up with this pace of transformation? And to tell you all about this, we can welcome Kati Ruohomäki, Chief Policy Advisor of the Confederation of Finnish Industries. So the stage is yours, Kati.
Yes, thank you. So When I was asked to come here, and thank you for that, for Fest Energy, the energy transition was already going on, but now in the last month we have seen a very negative effect of the Ukraine war and Russian aggressive attack there. So the things are really changed very fast in the energy sector as well. Oops. Yep, here. So I'm working as a policy chief advisor in the EK. EK is a confederation of Finnish industry. And our job is to offer our views, the business views, to decision makers to take care of the business as well as the environment in my area. Today I will talk to you about the Ukraine war, the energy prices and availability of energy, and the ongoing process of the EU's energy and climate package, Fit for 55. And finally, what we see, how can we keep up and be like a leader in this energy transition. For Ukraine war, of course, the energy is in the core of that. Europe is very independent on Russian energy, the gas, especially in the Central Europe and Eastern Europe. We have a little bit better situation here in Finland because our energy mixture is very wide. We have the gas, of course, coming from Russia, and we have raw oil, which mostly Neste is buying from Russia, and some coal is coming there, uranium as well from the uranium from the Russia sources. But our dependency is not very severe. Only for some enterprises which use especially Russian fuels, the biofuels, for instance, they have to now find out the better options, domestic options or other sources to buy outside Finland. But for EU, the situation is very severe. How to survive for the next heating season for next winter. So the EU Commission published 8th of March the communication on the Repower EU, and the target is to get rid of the Russian dependency, on the Russian energy by 2027. So it's only 5 years, and it's very fast in the context of energy systems, as you well know. For EU, this communication, the Commission explained 3 different terms there. So the first one was how to save already before end of this year 2/3 of the Russian gas imports by adding the LNG and the pipeline imports, the other countries, accelerating the EU-wide energy saving measures, and front-loading the renewable investments. And then, because the energy prices were very high level already on autumn, it started autumn, and I think it's all known that the Russian was behind of that already there, because they refused to sell any spot volumes in gas, for instance. They are only delivered the agreed amount of gas. For the high energy prices, the Commission make proposals already on autumn, like a toolbox, and now they added some urgent measures there. So there are new state aid framework. Doesn't sound very severe, but the EU controls the state aid, and all kind of support for companies, for instance, has to be notified for EU, and that's why the state aid guidelines and rules, they prevent any kind of urgent actions there. Also, they said for member states that they can use their ETS revenues, because there are also limits how to use them. And then they suggested to have the temporary windfall tax for setting electricity prices to households. Windfall tax is something that was discussed in Finland also a few years ago, like I think 5-6 years ago. and it means like the electricity companies get extra profits for electricity price because the coal is setting the price, and if they don't buy the allowances for the energy production, electricity production, so they get like a windfall profit there. And then there is also impact assessments going on with the electricity market design if there is need to make any changes there. And then for the gas storage policy, so EU Commission proposed to have like they are doing their legislative proposal for by end of this month to how to fill up the storages in EU territory up to 90% of the capacity by end of September. And all this is very demanding, but the member states, they have their summit, you know, the European Council, where the heads of state have their meetings. So they have the meeting on a few days after this communication in Versailles, and they decided, okay, we have to phase out dependency on Russian gas, oil, and coal as soon as possible. But there is no agreement on any import ban as such. And then they asked Commission to make the legislative proposals and speed up the developments there in these actions. There are another meeting today and Friday. Also the European Council, the heads of states are again having the meeting. And they are repeating, I've seen the draft conclusions, so they are repeating, I think they will repeat also the same kind of decisions there. So more likely there is no ban for Russian imports as well after this meeting this week. It's a very difficult issue for Europe because we are dependent on Russian energy so far, and it's not just possible to cut it by a day or two, or even before end of this year. But I think member states and Commission is doing their best how to get rid of the dependency. What is going on still, the Fit for 55 package, the Commission has said that if we are implementing this package wholly and totally, so it will reduce the 30% of the imports of gas, for total gas amount in Europe by 2030. So it's important to keep up with these proposals, and that is what we are also committed as a EK and as a business in Finland. I think we have some concerns in some proposals, but there are all those proposals which are not affecting the target as such. For energy and climate package, so here is something, the background on that. I'm not going very into deep in this, but the package was announced, published July last year, and before Christmas actually there come another package, additional proposals with some other subjects as well. So this new 55% reduction, greenhouse gas reduction targets, was supposed to achieve by this new package. So all the legislation, energy and climate legislation, is going to be tightening. And the EU Parliament and Council is now processing on those dozen proposals, plus those which came out before Christmas. And of course it takes time, so they are now amending those proposals, and after that they have a negotiation together with the commissions, and then maybe in the end of this year we will see some final decisions on some directives, and maybe something is leaving to the spring, for instance the energy taxation directive proposal. And then it takes time to implement them in national level, and then we will see them all completed maybe by end of 2024. There are some regulation, because directive comes slower, but some regulations some come faster in force. So here's the collection of the main directives, and just saying something about what is going on there. So the national emission targets, they will be tightening, that's not a surprise. And for Finland, it's maybe most problematic was the transport. To have it, the Finnish target is 50%, and to have that emission reduction in transport has been problematic. But of course, we have now in a new situation. I think these energy prices we have never seen before in diesel and benzene, so we'll encourage the people buy faster electric vehicles, for instance, or use other fuels, biofuels, for instance. And then for the ETS, there is revision on that. The ETS, the traditional ETS, is already 17 years old, and it's for the energy production industry and EU intra-aviation. They will expand it to maritime, and that will bring us a lot of costs as well. And then there will be a new emission trading system for transport and heating of buildings, meaning the oil heating and gas heating, which is actually happening in the buildings. And there we are talking favor of the free allowances, which is not there is because the cap is determining the target. So what is happening under the cap, it doesn't matter. So we are saying very strongly that we need enough free allowances for industry, that they can do the investments, that there are enough resources for investments for green transition. And then for the totally new mechanism, carbon border adjustment mechanism, and it was just decided on the member states that they will take it as Commission proposed, and it's for the 5 sectors. For electricity, it means the import from Russian electricity to Finland. There are some revisions also for the renewables and the energy efficiency and the energy tax legislation as well. Before Christmas, there was like a gas package, and then the directive proposal for the buildings, energy efficiency in buildings. And 6 others in this package was mostly the transport. So how to keep up on all this? The earlier green transition, and then this very sudden peaking energy prices after autumn, and now continuous level of the high energy prices, the gas and the electricity also in Finland. So if we have collected here some suggestion how to cope, how to keep up. And one is the accelerating the electrification further. We have here some, this is mostly what the government can do. So we are hoping to have the more support for the electro-intensive industry. There is a national gap there coming to that support, and the cap was calculated when the allowance was like 30 euros, and now we have seen the price of 100 in carbon allowance. And then the service companies, the way to ease their situation is to lower the electricity tax there. And there are new measures that the Commission is proposing with this state aid new guidelines, and we hope that the Finland is also studying them and trying to get them in use as soon as possible if we see that they are rational measures. And then for, of course, accelerating all kind of investments in green products, energy production processes and storage capacities. And here we have problems with the permitting processes. So even if we are now getting more investment money for this Europe facility and recovery funds, so it doesn't help if those investments are waiting in the line in the offices of the environmental authorities. So we need very quick actions there. to speed up these, and especially in the Vaasa Administrative Court, where who is handling also the what is this, complaints of these permits. And then we see that there are need for additional resources also, but the main point is digitalization, that how to use the digitalization in the permitting processes. So it's really the key there. It's not the key to just add more and more persons to handle the applications, but to do everything more smoothly. And then we have a very good voluntary energy agreement system in Finland. It is almost like 80% of our energy use is among that. So the system is there. So it's a place to accelerate also the energy efficiency investments there. And then for the transport sector, so there are good proposal to reduct the tax of the commuting to people who are driving to work, and then for this preparing this professional diesel tax return for business logistic. And then all in what is needed in here in horizontally is of course to see where are all those key economic and social resources we are needing for this urgent situation this year and also in the longer term. In a longer term, we have the same kind of suggestion. We need to have really changes for our regulatory system in permitting processes. And then we need to figure out if it's possible to use more widely the energy subsidized for energy efficiency investments and energy investments. I mentioned this recovery fund already, and I know that there are an application for 1.3 billion euros sent, and there are only money by now, was it 500 million euros? But this is only the first stage of that. So we hope that this money is used very fast and very wisely. And then after this is in the end, so we need to have resources to continuously to give in to speed up investments and of course the research and innovation work as well. And then for low emission transport, we need subsidies also there for incentives for electric vehicles. The fuel prices are so high right now that nobody imagined to get any more tax increases, which was usually used every year, 5% maybe more tax there, but now it's not possible anymore, and we need more positive incentives for people and for logistics to change to low emission transport. In the end of this presentation, I have our preliminary messages to next year elections, and these are more or less the same issues here than I was mentioning, so I leave them to your to study those later. But thank you. That was my my speech today, and I hope if you have any questions, so I can answer them now or later.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kati. Really good presentation. A lot of things to digest. As we see, the pace of change is even more rapid than we thought last year, when it was already quite rapid. In this very, very fast process, do you see that there are perhaps discrepancies between the goals that we in Finland have and that the EU has, and is there a way to, if there are such discrepancies, to find a common solution towards the kind of issues we have in green transition, or are we marching in lockstep towards the same goals?
I think we are marching to the same goal, and that's very good. And I think that Finland has very good position right now, because we have done this work already a long time. We are in a good speed in the energy transition. We have almost, after Olkiluoto is in full capacity, so we have 90% the electricity is total is carbon free. So we have a good possibilities to cope everything here. But of course, in this situation, we might find ourselves in a situation that we have to increase the use of peat, for instance, for the safety reasons, we have to maybe go a little bit backwards, but it's only temporarily, and I think we all are aware of the need to get rid of the Russian gas and oil, for instance. And I think it's not wise to get any other new dependency either, to get dependence on the Saudi Arabic or other countries as well. So the renewables and nuclear are clearly the answer. Already the Belgium decided to prolong their decision to have still a 10-year use of the nuclear reactors. They further before decided to end it by end of this year or next year, I'm not sure. And Germany is in a very difficult situation here because they are so against nuclear, and now they have to increase the use of coal, and they are so dependent on Russian gas. So I think the most difficult situation right now is there.
Very good, or very challenging, if you may say so. Another question, perhaps before we take from the audience. As a waste-to-energy operator, of course, we see the implementation of the different policies that happen. And to us, it seems that at least sometimes there seems to be a 4-year period, well, of course, as long as the Commission sits, when something happens, and then we see changes because the next Commission comes in. Do you see that there is enough long-term clarity in these choices to make the investment horizon, so to say, more clear?
I think we have a quite good, very long-term horizon. So like 2050, Europe is climate neutral. And then we have the system of, we have 2020 package, and now we have had the 2030 package. And then it came quite soon, these new revisions of everything. So that was quite a shock for industry, I think. But looking at backwards now, I think it's really needed. And the only way is to keep up with the knowledge, to know what is happening and following the processes. I know that commissions and member states, Versailles summit, all of that sounds very away from the normal business daily life, but it's really coming there, and that's why we are concentrating on that what is coming and how can we influence that there are very rational rules coming there. And of course there are the Commission is with the Fit for 55 package, they are going more and more detail, and that development is quite worrying because we see that important is the target and maybe some main actions like ETS, the emission trading system, to build up that. But when you go very detailed, what you can burn and what not, and with waste, I think it's very difficult because you have all the environmental legislation there as well. So you should circulate it, you can burn it, but then the use of ashes is, for instance, very, very hard to use. So there are so much legislation that all details are not very much, they can't put them together to get like
coordinate.
Yes, and have the coherence total system.
Yeah, I think being awake, being proactive, and influencing the processes when they happen is really important. It's really nice to hear that our organizations here in Finland are awake. Do we have any questions from the audience? At least one over here.
Thanks. Hannes Tuhenitty, Bioenergy Association of Finland. To follow up on the last question, Kati, do you consider that, have you seen any signs that, for instance, Commission or the member states consider that all the nitty-gritty details of the legislation maybe could be at least postponed or put aside for a while to ease the transition or ease this energy shock, in a way that the energy legislation would be more lean?
For all of this, based on this Fit for 55 package, based on Green Deal program, which started when the Commission started, and without, I mean that in spite of the coronavirus epidemic, for instance, everything has gone smoothly and nothing has postponed. So I think that they see that it's even more important to have everything in place because of the Ukraine war. For the state aid guidelines, because the state aid issues is very regulated in Europe, and I think there they are going to make some relief on the regulation, so the member states can support more freely to their households, to their citizens, and also the enterprises. But otherwise, I see no signs that the Fit for 55 package, for instance, that there will be some postponed issues there. I hope that they will take attention on the free allowances and the competitiveness of the European enterprises during the process. But in my eyes, it looks like everything goes on like it is with the package. And then there will be some urgent actions in addition of that.
Very good. Any further questions? There's at least one over there. It's a bit bright out here, so it's nice to have vision from the background as well.
My name is Göran Östberg. I'm a project manager in the Vaasa Region Development and working with the circular economy and sustainability. This status of material streams and the waste, we have a system for it, but it's very difficult for companies to have these waste streams to be classified like end of waste. Do you have thought about this in your organization and how we can change it with the authorities and so on?
Yes, I'm working for energy and climate, but there is an environmental lawyer in our team, and it's in her responsible area. So this end of waste criteria is really a complex issue. And I think we can maybe hear about that later today with these two more concentrating on waste. But I know everything dealing with waste is very, very complex. I was working earlier before EK in the UPM Kajaani mill as an environment and energy manager. And we were building about the new deposit place, and I was dealing with the waste. And I know that it's, when I heard the word waste, it means troubles. But I know that West Energy is using it as a business opportunity, so good for them.
Yes, I've seen one graph where the most challenging and the least valuable fuel of all is municipal waste, and yet we make it work. So
yes, and you have this great project going on, this Sambo project with carbon capture and utilization process. So that's very good.
Going forward with recycling, so to say. If there are no further questions, I think we can move on, and I think this is a very good way to move on towards the next speaker we have here today. So we have a man who probably needs a little introduction, but in any case, I shall introduce him. We have senior advisor Oras Tynkkynen from Sitra, and given his very long experience both in political decision making and as a climate specialist, I think it would be very interesting to hear his interpretation of the role of waste to energy in a climate positive economy, which is where we're heading towards. So let's see what Oras has to say.
Thank you very much for the invitation to join this discussion today. In the very few precious minutes I have at my disposal, I will try to make the point that the waste to energy sector needs to change in order to meet the requirements of a future climate positive economy. Whenever I speak about tackling the climate crisis, I tend to start with this figure, which is taken from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report on limiting global heating to 1.5 degrees. And it shows the global net carbon emissions over the coming century. And I show this figure mostly for two reasons. The first one is that it really shows how deep and rapid emission reductions we need in the coming decades. Basically, we would need to halve our emissions every decade from now on. And that translates into about 7% annual emission reductions globally. Needless to say, we are very, very far from that currently. by 2050, we would already need to be carbon neutral at the global level. In other words, we would need to suck back as much carbon from the atmosphere as we release at the same time from different sources. And my second message from this figure is that even that is not going to be enough. Even reaching carbon neutrality globally is not going to be enough, because beyond that, we need to get to carbon negative emissions or climate positivity, basically to make good of the damages we have caused over the time historically by releasing vast amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. So we need rapid emission reductions to get to carbon neutrality, and we need to go beyond carbon neutrality to net negative emissions. That in and of itself, I think, is an important message, but for our discussion today, I think it's important to unpack that a bit. To get to carbon neutrality, we basically need two things. Not surprisingly, we need to reduce emissions as much as possible. But secondly, we need to capture some of the emissions that have been released and continue to be released to get to net zero emissions. So we need two different baskets of measures: emission reductions and carbon dioxide removals or capture. And here in this figure, this has been broken down into these parts. So in gray, you see the emission reductions that we are likely to see under different scenarios in the future. So we need to reduce emissions, not surprisingly. But then on top of that, we also need to capture some of those emissions back from the atmosphere. And that is in these figures presented under the zero line in these colored areas. So we either need to suck carbon from the atmosphere through forests, for instance, or we need to use various technological solutions to produce negative emissions. And this brings me to the role of waste to energy, because waste to energy can and needs to play a role in both these parts, both reducing emissions and producing negative emissions. So far, waste to energy has been contributing to tackling the climate crisis, mostly through reducing carbon emissions. And there are two main ways it has been doing that. The first one has been to replace fossil fuels in energy production, which of course is extremely important and urgent. And secondly, waste to energy has been cutting emissions from waste in landfills. And this has been very welcome, of course. Now, in the future, this role needs to change a bit. And I would make the case that there are two different uses for waste to energy as we move closer towards a climate positive economy. The first one is basically recycling carbon. So the carbon that is contained in the waste that is burned in waste to energy plants, we would need to recycle that to produce, for instance, synthetic fuels, also called power to X fuels. And then we could use those fuels to replace fossil fuels in sectors and use cases where currently we have very few options available. This could be trucks, for instance, this could be airplanes. We can electrify cars easily. We can't electrify trucks or airplanes so easily. So that's where we would need these synthetic fuels in the future. And that's where waste to energy plants could contribute. But the second part could be to provide negative emissions. A part of the waste that goes into waste to energy plants has biogenic carbon. So carbon that is of biological origin, made from biomass. And what that means for climate is that if we capture the carbon released from burning that biogenic waste, then we can actually provide negative emissions. Why is that? Because when that biomass that is contained in the waste, when that grew originally, it sucked carbon from the atmosphere. And if we capture the carbon from waste to energy plants and don't let it back into the atmosphere, then we can actually produce negative emissions. So I would argue that waste to energy plants have a slightly different role in tackling the climate crisis in the future. They can contribute to reducing emissions in various hard to abate sectors that are difficult to tackle today with today's technologies and options. And secondly, they can provide negative emissions if we capture the biogenic carbon and store it permanently. Now, a couple of points about waste to energy plants in recycling and storing carbon? What is their specific role compared to other options? One important factor is the concentration of carbon dioxide in the emissions. The lower the concentration, the more expensive it is to capture that carbon. And the highest concentrations in most uses you see in bioethanol production. There the carbon is very concentrated in the emissions, so it is fairly cheap and easy to capture that. In waste to energy plants, the concentrations are much lower, but they are still higher than in the ambient air around us in the atmosphere. So it is cheaper and easier to capture carbon from the emissions of waste to energy plants than from ambient air. The second perspective could be to look at the volumes of carbon available in waste to energy plants. Emissions here, they are presented in gray, and the width of that bar tells you the volume. And you can see that out of the different sources of biogenic carbon available, waste to energy plants are not the biggest, but not the smallest one either. So we could get meaningful amounts of carbon from waste to energy plants emissions. The height of the bar tells you the price of capturing that carbon. And you can again see that waste to energy plants are not the most attractive option for capturing carbon, but they are not the most expensive one either. And as we move closer to a climate positive economy, we will need to start using also those options that are not the cheapest and not the easiest. So there will come a time when it actually will make a whole lot of sense to capture carbon from waste to energy plants and start using that for good. The final point I would like to leave you with is about the speed and scale of implementation. This figure is taken from the International Energy Agency, IEA, and it shows the deployment of carbon capture, use and storage in industries. And on the furthest right, you have a bar that shows how much we should be deploying carbon capture, use and storage by 2030 in industries to be on the right pathway towards reaching our climate goals and limiting global heating to tolerable levels. And to the left of that bar, you see the pipeline of projects that we know of now in the industries. And if you compare these bars, you can see that we are lagging very, very far behind from where we need to be in 2030 to reach the required levels of deployment of this technology in industries. And it also means that we need to scale up action very rapidly. There's one myth that I would like to challenge here, which is that if you need to be somewhere by 2030 or 2040 or even 2050, you can basically just sit back and relax. And then right before that time, then you can start very quickly introducing some technologies. No. If you need to be by 2030 at a certain level of deployment, you need to start taking action today so that in time you will reach your goal. And that also applies to the capture and use and storage of carbon from waste to energy plants. If we want to be at a certain point in 2030, we need to start taking action already today and deploying those solutions already today. And that is the message I would like to leave you with today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Oras. I hope we have Oras online as well. Perhaps. Can you hear us?
I can hear you guys.
Very good. Thank you so much. I think you ended with the best message that's possible. Time is critical here, and we feel the same way. We feel that if we want to make big-scale investments, we have to start pretty much right now to make it a possibility. Before we take questions from the audience, I perhaps have one question that I would like to ask. Actually, I have many, but let's stick with one and see what the audience says. So, given that it's crucial to have, well, we know for certain that carbon capture can create value for everyone here, for the whole planet. But of course, that value is still depending on the product, quite hard to translate into money that makes businesses run. Do you think we have enough policies in place to make carbon capture on a large scale viable?
We absolutely do not. We need certain fundamentals, the basic legislative frameworks for deploying CCUS at scale. And quite importantly, we also need the right financial incentives for deploying that solution. So currently, in the emissions trading scheme, if you are able to capture your carbon, then of course you don't have to pay for the carbon. But we don't really have the right incentives for producing negative emissions, not yet. And that we need to introduce sooner or later. Otherwise, we won't see these solutions deployed at the scale required.
Indeed, very good. Now let's turn to the audience. So, any questions? Here's one.
Hi Oras, this is Hannes Tuohiniitty. Thank you for your great presentation. I wonder how do you see the development for incentives for CCUS, particularly in EU? What are the main discussions now, and do you foresee that we will have the, let's say, the architecture in place by 2025?
And the Commission communication on carbon removal, I think, is a good starting point. It does provide a certain pathway and certain steps in the right direction. My concern is more about the speed. I'm pretty confident that the EU will be able to come up with the required legislative framework and incentives over time. However, like I said earlier, if we want to deploy these new technologies at scale, we need time to build that up, and that's why we need to start as soon as possible. And I think the EU hopefully will able to accelerate the introduction of the required measures to get the CCUS solutions really deployed rapidly. I would just say that rather than just wait for the EU to take action, I think countries like Finland can really introduce many measures at the national level. We will be hearing from Norway, and I think Norway is really the prime example of how a country, if it makes the strategic choice to invest in these necessary vital technologies, how it can actually move very fast and very much forward and not wait for the EU to come up with all the solutions.
Very good, thank you. Further questions? Anyone? If not, then I want to thank you, Oras. It was a pleasure to hear from you about the future role and importance of CCUS, and we'll be meeting soon again in the final panel discussion. But now, let's move forward. Let's see if that works. So, our next speaker represents perhaps the country with the most advanced insights and activities into carbon capture and storage and utilization in the whole world. And she also represents the company that has been doing a lot of work to bring forward a full-scale solution and a whole value chain solution for storage of CO2 captured from waste to energy. Sadly, we only have Jannike here with us in video form because they have a very busy week regarding news about the sales of this company to new owners, which hopefully will move the CCS project even more forward. So after the presentation, we have her colleague, Markus Hove, Public Affairs Manager at Fortum, joining us for the discussion and questions. So let's get on with the presentation.
Thank you very much for that introduction. So my name is Jannike, and I'm head of the carbon capture and storage project in Oslo, in Fortum Oslo Varme, where we are aiming to establish the world's first full-scale CCS plant on a waste-to-energy plant. We have two owners. Fortum, the energy company Fortum, is one of them, and the city of Oslo is the other one. And Fortum Oslo Varme is a district heating company where the heat from waste incineration is the main heat source into the district heating system. We also have other heat sources adding to the system during cold winters, and we are providing heat and electricity for the city of Oslo, large buildings in Oslo, and for the electricity grid. We're also building up in district cooling as a new area of operations to be able to provide comfort temperature all year for our customers. Now, a little bit more about the project. As I mentioned, we are still aiming to be the world's first, and basically the project is fully developed. What we need is to get the financing in place. We are a part of the Norwegian full-scale national CCS project named Longship, consisting of 2 capture projects and a transport and storage chain. The other capture project is a cement factory capturing CO2 from the flue gas from the cement production. We are capturing CO2 from the waste incineration of residual waste. For both these capture projects, we will be delivering CO2 to port, where the transport and storage chain Northern Lights will take over, transporting the CO2 with vessels to an intermediate storage on the western coast of Norway. From there, the CO2 in liquid form will be injected via a long pipeline to this permanent geological reservoir, where the CO2 will be permanently stored. We are aiming to capture up to 400,000 tons of CO2 every year, with a 90% capture of the total emissions from our plant. Now, one exceptional thing with waste to energy or waste incineration is that about 50% of the CO2 that we are emitting is from burning biomass or biological waste. This means that when we capture this biological CO2, we are in effect removing CO2 from the atmosphere, because this CO2 is a part of the natural CO2 cycle. I will get back to that a little later. We have developed this project since 2015 through feasibility, concept, and FEED studies. And the project is now fully matured, and we're just working to have the financing in place to be able to get started. Our plant is not situated at port, which means that we also need to transport the CO2 from our plant at the south of Oslo to port, which is a transport distance of about 10 kilometers. We're planning to do that using emission-free tank trucks. And that is also an important demonstration factor, because a lot of CO2 emission points in Europe is not situated directly at port and will need to find solutions for transportation. You can see the plant on the lower right, where the colored parts is the planned new CCS plant or carbon capture plant, while the gray areas is the existing waste to energy plant. So as you can see, the footprint is quite large, and this is something that we will need to see developing for the next projects to come, to reduce the footprint, to reduce the overall costs, and also to reduce energy usage. We have chosen amine technology to capture CO2 from our flue gas, and to make sure that we knew everything we needed to know about this process, we built and operated a small pilot plant. And we ran this pilot plant for about 5,000 hours, even more, and tested very thoroughly the reactions between the amine technology and our specific flue gas. And we had very good results from this test period. Very low emissions, very low degradation of the amine, and also a high capture rate. So we feel very confident that this technology will work, and it will work it's a very good fit with waste to energy flue gas, and it will be safe for the environment and capture large amounts of CO2. We've also conducted one new test period this fall with a modified version of the amine from Shell to see if it's possible to reduce energy usage and have a faster reaction. And also preliminary very good results from that test period. So hopefully we will be able to implement this also, this learning also in our project. And sharing our knowledge and learning is a very important aspect of our project. Being able to contribute to realizing the next projects to come in the waste to energy sector, but also in other industrial sectors where we have hard to abate emissions that will need carbon capture and storage to deal with their emissions. A little bit more about the storage. The CO2 will be liquefied, as I mentioned, which reduces the volume quite substantially. And then under high pressure and temperature, this CO2 will be injected about 3 kilometers below the seabed. So it's very deep in a geological formation consisting of sandstone, which is a porous stone, where the CO2 will be basically spreading out in the water that is already there. And on top of this sandstone, there's a layer of shale, which basically seals the storage and makes sure that the CO2 will stay in the geological formation forever. Over time, the CO2 will dissolve into the salt water and also over a very long time form into minerals. So this means that the longer time, the more stable the CO2 will be. Now, dealing with waste is one of the huge climate challenges that the world is facing. And as waste amounts are increasing, cities are growing, populations are growing, welfare is growing. This means that also waste amounts are growing, even though our goals and what we're working towards is to reduce waste amounts. And we have to deal with this waste in a sustainable manner. And for the waste that we cannot sort and recycle, waste to energy is the most sustainable way of treating this waste. Landfills are connected with large methane emissions, which actually is responsible for about 20% of global warming. So reducing methane emissions from landfills is one of the main measures that we need to do to reduce waste, to reduce emissions from waste handling. And working towards the goals in the EU with 65% sorting and recycling and reduction to 10% landfills, we have 40 million tons of residual waste that we cannot sort and recycle, that we need to deal with. So this means that we need to build about 100 more waste to energy plants at the size of our plant in Oslo. And this is what we're working towards in the future. We're not only, we need to have measures all along this value chain, which includes to reuse and reduce waste amounts and to keep the resources in the cycle. We also need to avoid the methane emissions from landfills. And then by adding CCS to waste to energy or to waste incineration, we not only reduce the fossil CO2 from this process, but we also remove biogenic CO2, and by that remove CO2 from the atmosphere. So this is a very important and a technically feasible next step in sustainable waste handling. A little bit more about the potential of carbon removal, or negative emissions as it is also called. And this is again back to the 50% of biogenic CO2 that we are emitting from our process, approximately 50%. And this is when we burn biomass and capture and store the CO2, in effect taking it out from the atmosphere. This is giving more time and and space to deal with the hard to abate fossil emissions that we cannot get rid of in the short term. And the focus on negative emissions or biological bioenergy combined with CCS is gaining more and more focus, because this is the longer it takes before we actually manage to deal with the fossil emissions, the more negative emissions we will need. And this is where waste to energy can contribute to a large scale, capturing biological CO2 and storing it, and actually removing CO2 from the cycle. We are expecting a proposal from the EU at the end of this year, addressing this carbon removal area, where we need a framework and a certification, as this is very immature today. With a framework for this that is addressing the permanence of the actual removal, as well as the sustainability of the biomass, and also to make sure that we're only counting the removal once. So this means that it cannot be counted both on a company level, a city level, and a state level, for example. We will need to make sure that we have a system to ensure single counting of removals. But this is a very promising area that can also contribute to financing these projects in the future. Now, to wrap up a little bit more about the status of the project and the financing. As I mentioned, we are fully matured and ready to go as soon as we have the financing in place. During the Longship Norwegian State CCS project, we have received funding of approximately 300 million euros, provided that we can come up with the remaining funding. We have applied to the Innovation Fund, which proved unsuccessful for the first call, and we have reapplied for the second call. But we're also exploring possibilities for financing with our owners and with the Norwegian state to see if it's possible to manage without support from the EU. Our main goal is still to have a financial close at the end of Q2, second quarter 2022. And if we manage that, we can have the plant in operation in 2026. So that's what we're working towards. And that by that I will conclude, and I see that I have used my time. So thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you very much, and I hope Markus can send our heartfelt thanks to Janneke as well. Markus, are you with us today? Very good. And you can hear me as well.
Yes, perfect.
Excellent. Now, perhaps to tackle the big question, given that there will be ownership changes, do you see what kind of effect they will have perhaps on the CCS project, bringing it even forward, or?
Yeah, we have for the CCS project, we have very good news now, because yesterday it was announced that Fortum will sell its share of Fortum Oslo Varme to 3 new owners: Hafslund Eco, which is the power company of the Oslo municipality, and also to 2 equity funds, so High-Tech Vision and Infranode. So this is very good, and the new owners have said that they are putting the money on the table to realize this project within the frame that the government has given us. So the 300 million euros, we have them from the government, and then the new owners will put the rest of the money on the table to realize the project. Of course, there are a few conditions of that this new company is approved by the competition authority, that we have the approval of ESA, which is the EFTA surveillance authority, similar to the Commission doing supervision of state support like we have with the 300 million, and that the government prolonged the support period from 8 to 10 years. But we think that this will come in order and that we could start building already this summer in June, July.
That sounds very promising, and I think it's a great news for the whole industry and even beyond that as well. Now, given that you have a specialty in public affairs, How do you see the role of public awareness and public support for these kind of new technology initiatives? What have you done, and how is that dynamic working in Norway?
In Norway, I think Norway is a little bit special country. As it was said, the previous speaker mentioned that Norway is doing a lot on CCS, and we have had CCS on the Norwegian continental shelf since the mid-90s. So people trust the technology, and they don't afraid of it, as you have seen maybe in Germany. And I think the only issue that has been with carbon capture has been cost. That like the political separation lines between political parties are not about if we believe in climate change or CCS as a technology. It's like how much money should we put into it. And that's also why the previous government sent us to the Innovation Fund, because they wanted to share the risk with the EU. But we have worked quite a lot towards the European market and the European politicians. And we see that there's big lack of understanding of the need for CCS and waste to energy, because they connect CCS to fossil industries, and those are supposed to go away, but the waste will stay, unfortunately, for the foreseeable future, and we need a sustainable way to tackle that. And then we have, of course, suggested that CCS is the best solution for the residual waste handling. And we have seen that a lot of European politicians, especially within the Finnish MIPs, have really supported this. And Henna Virkkunen has stood out as a little bit as a champion for CCS on waste to energy. Also led a letter to the Commission together with 15 other MIPs, urging the Commission to take action to incentivize this technology.
Indeed, very nice to hear. Maybe let's turn to the audience once again. Do we have any questions either from the audience or from the chat? Okay, there's one from Katja. So, yes.
So my name is Kati Ruohomäki. I'm coming from the Confederation of Finnish Industry, and we were invited by our colleague in Norwegian Confederation to visit your plant and also the cement factory and the Equinor to tell about how the storage going on. So I was curious about the, you mentioned costs, but when the operation is in full capacity, so how do you collect the fees for that? I mean, is the waste distributor paying you, or do you have to have a higher prices for district heating, for instance? So how this business logistic goes?
Yeah, we see several different ways of increasing the revenue streams for the project. Because of course, as this is the first CCS project, it's probably much more expensive than the 10th project will be. So, but we see a lot of new opportunities. And then, of course, that the municipalities using our facility, they have said that they are interested in tendering for carbon neutral waste services, and that could be at a higher cost than ordinary incineration services. So that's 5 to 10% maybe of the gate fee. Also, then we could sell, district heating is already carbon neutral, but of course the image is getting even better with CCS. And then we could sell carbon removal certificates, even on the voluntary market, as it's already functioning, or that there's a state market or European market, such as we see with DTS. And we have signed up for this Pure Earth platform, which is a Finnish startup that came out of Fortum, which is more like a stock exchange for carbon removals. And we see a lot of interest from companies all over the world there to buy these removal certificates. But of course, our project, we have the support from the state for 8 to 10 years now. And we have also transport and storage free of charge in that period. So we don't have the same expenses in the beginning as the other project. And in that time frame, we expect that there will be ETS, for instance, on waste to energy, so that we will avoid paying that when we have CCS.
Very good to hear that the business model is working and you have a good basis for value creation. Any further questions? If there's none, I might have one more. of course, we are located next to the Baltic Sea basin, which isn't necessarily as ideal for storage of CO2. How do you see the role of carbon storage for areas located farther away from the North Sea? And is transport an option, or do we need to find other solutions?
Of course, this is outside the scope of our project, but I think when we speak to Northern Lights, the transport and storage operator, they are very interested in getting customers and from all over Europe, and they're even in discussions with waste energy plants in Switzerland, who is landlocked. So there are a lot of opportunities, and I think transport will of course become cheaper as everything else within the CCS industry when you have the volumes. So if you have big clusters in Finland, then I think it's definitely like you get the transport and storage costs down.
Very good to hear. And I think infrastructure and building that infrastructure and having it in place enables so much more when we go forward with these solutions. Very good. Thank you, Markus, so much. And we'll also see you again soon. I guess it's time for us then at West Energy. So I will take over the slides. Let's see how this works. So without further ado, the topic I would like to present to you today is called Energy Sample CCU. What this means is that West Energy, with our partners, we have several partners, both in the energy system, in export industries, as well as waste management and circular economy. And together we're building, and we're going to build a system to utilize CO2 and recycle carbon. Very quickly about West Energy. Here you can see some figures from our operations. Many of you may be familiar with them, and Olli introduced us quite well. Also, in any case, we operate the waste-to-energy plant in Mustasaari, 10 kilometers from the center of Vaasa. We refine around 200,000 tons of source-separated municipal waste into energy, so heat. Out of district heating, we produce almost 60% of all heat in the Vaasa area into electricity, and also we utilize the materials, the remaining materials, so to say. So a lot of minerals, a lot of ash gets turned into construction minerals, and also the metals. We are one of the largest waste-to-energy operators in Finland, of course, paling in comparison to some plants in Central Europe or China, for example, but a very large operator in the Finnish scale. And of course, then we have an acute awareness of the fact that we also need to do more for the climate. But let's go to the beginning, so to say, where it all began from. Before West Energy, around 10 years ago, in this area, almost all heat was produced with coal-fired boilers. So the specific emissions of district heating were extremely high, over 300 grams per kilowatt hour. And as you heard from for example, Ora's presentation, waste to energy has been a crucial solution in lowering those figures to around 1/2. And we've, of course, not been resting since then. We've further improved our processes to get to even lower figures. So we've reduced the CO2 emissions of heating by more than 60% in these 10 years. But of course, that's not enough, as we've heard today, and as we all know, there's a lot to be done to mitigate climate change, stop it at a reasonable level, and we are aware of our role and responsibility in that. So what we are trying to do is to first get these emissions to zero, and then, as we heard from our Norwegian colleagues as well, utilize the fact that we have biogenic carbon in the waste and go beyond zero to negative emissions to actually build a technological carbon sink out of our facility, our waste-to-energy plant as well. In Finland, of course, the question of value creation is a little bit different than in Norway. As said, we don't have an easy direct solution for storage. Not that it's necessarily easy, but it isn't as obvious as, for example, in the North Sea region. So where to find that value for carbon capture? And here we come to the role of transport fuels and energy samples CCU. So our idea to begin this transformation, to start the process toward carbon negativity or climate positivity, is to utilize our flue gas as a fuel source. So we are going to produce LSNG, synthetic natural gas that is liquefied domestically for the use of road and marine transport, where there's a lot of need for different transition fuels. And we're going to be producing around 10 million liters, or replacing around 10 million liters of fossil diesel and fuel or oil every year with the help of this production. Of course, this is going to be a key issue for that move towards full carbon negativity. This is the first step in a large value chain that is going to be built around carbon capture and green hydrogen and so on in this region. And it's going to complement the other projects such as HFLEX-E that some of you may have heard about. That is also a very important project in this new form of sector coupling that the sector is building. And of course, most importantly, this is a question of carbon handprint as well. West Energy isn't an export company by itself, but our partners are very important energy companies and export companies in the global markets, and it's here that we can achieve much greater results than just with the CO2 from West Energy's plant. So, how does this thing work? First, we have the plant itself and a carbon capture system. So we capture the CO2. We are not striving in this project yet for full scale as they are going to do in FOV, but a significant fraction of the CO2 will be captured. Then we will produce synthetic or hydrogen with the help of wind power and some water, of course. We're going to recycle actually water from the plant into this system so that we don't use up more resources. And once we have the CO2 and the hydrogen, we're going to mix them up into methane, which also evidently releases some heat. Different parts of this process release some heat, and we can utilize that heat to increase the amount of emission-free district heating in the area as well. So we can replace more and more of those fossil fuel sources that still remain. And at the final stage, we will liquefy that gas, and then it is ready for the needs of long-range transports, especially the marine sector. This production, for example, could replace or fuel up 2 ferries of the type of the world-class type we have in the this area, the Aurora Botnium. So 2 ferries of that size could be powered for a whole year with this production. And of course, in addition to the LSNG and the heat, we also get oxygen, which is a material that can be utilized in industrial sources and provides interesting opportunities for the battery sector that is being created in the Vaasa area as well. So several different issues, and because we have an infrastructure for gas already, it makes sense to bind hydrogen into that infrastructure and network to get it forward, get that transition going before we have solutions that are purpose-built for hydrogen. From West Energy's point of view, as said, this is the first step in a long process. We've worked for several years, actually, the time that I have been working in this present role I have in the company, we've been striving to find solutions to reduce those CO2 emissions down and recycle that carbon. And now we are at the stage where we can actually go forward and do it. So this facility will also be built as a platform for testing and expansion to pilot new solutions. So it is a demonstration plant for this solution, but also makes it possible to pilot the next solutions as well when we go forward. We can increase the amount of fuel production or alternatively produce different chemicals for feedstock for different processes. Polymers, for example, as well could be an option. We have already a process looking into those next steps. And what we aim to do is to go forward once we have this plant up and running, to then start looking at the next investments so that we can reach carbon negativity by the 30s. And as Ora said recently, there's not too much time, so we have to start doing things now if we want to get those targets in the 30s. They're not far away anymore, and these are of course big industrial investments. I said that we had some interesting partners along. One of these partners, or many of these partners, are experts in specific fields, and we wanted to build a consortium of companies that complement each other well to create the kind of value chain solution that is really sought after globally. But of course, these technologies can also be implemented in like one technology per site or so on, or as a full value chain, depending on what the needs of the future customers are. And we already see that there are billions and billions of euros in the potential market for these kind of solutions. For example, in the waste to energy sector, 500 plants in Europe, and as we see, some new projects building up, but a lot of future demand, which is pretty much certain. But it's also all other point sources of CO2, so the steel industry, the concrete industry, cement industry, pulp and paper, as well as bioenergy. We really do see the demand for these kind of solutions in all kinds of industries. And we also have a Norwegian connection, so to say, a bit of a different technology than the one that they are going to use in Oslo. But we and our partners here, we have an example from Voima Corporation, so a modular carbon capture plant. And this is really an example where we can, with Finnish engineering skills, commercialize groundbreaking solutions for carbon capture as well. And I think with this system, we are aiming for very, very low energy consumption, which brings the costs of capture down and makes it possible to create a utilization value chain where we actually have an end product that is profitable to sell. And as we've heard from many speakers, these solutions will be quite crucial in combating climate change in the coming decade and the decades after that. So the market exists. A few facts and figures. The investment costs will be around 50 million euros for this plant, and of course then when we go further into the next steps with this modular system, we're going to invest more. But this is where we start from. Our aim is to get this built at least by 2025. If the regulative process is good, if we can get the permitting done and there's not the kind of red tape that has plagued Finnish investments perhaps in the past, then we see a possibility of getting it ready even by 2024, so quite quickly. The overall captured amount is going to be 20,000 tons of CO2, so 25% of our fossil emissions, perhaps closer to 12 or 15% of the overall emissions. The solvent we're going to use is potassium carbonate, which offers some interesting options compared with amines. Both have their kind of like niches, but we think that this might be the best solution for us in this scale, and it's very interesting as a chemical, as it is non-toxic and quite cheap as well. As I said, we're going to recycle some water, and at the end of the day, we're going to produce around 7,300 tons, or if you think about the heating values, around 112 gigawatt hours of LSNG per annum after 2024, hopefully. not to forget our partners. So I would be very happy to present even more companies, but we have still negotiations ongoing, and I think we can present more of them during the spring as we go forward with the project. But right now I can already show you that we have some very interesting companies, big energy companies like Danfoss or Wärtsilä, or our capture partner Voima Corporation, an up-and-coming, no longer a startup, but an up-and-coming modular waste to energy and carbon capture company. Then of course we have our very good partners Vaasan Sähkö and EPV, who are cornerstones of the local energy ecosystem. And also one of our owner companies, Stormossen, and they are experts when it comes to biogas and the gas markets and transport fuel markets. But we have more partners in all parts of the spectrum, from offtake into different technologies, who will be involved in this project, and we will be happy to announce them when it's possible. We've also had very good assistance from many of our good partners, like AFRY, with which we've done long-term studies regarding carbon capture, so since 2018, 2019. A really important help also from the local infrastructure. Merenova has been helping us and coordinating this project to get us this far. And also our different marketing and public relations partners as well. The name Energy Sampo, many of you may have heard about it already during these days. It's quite an important thing in the Vaasa area. So this is really a platform of perhaps even competitors working together to find out how to create system-level carbon neutral solutions. So co-opetition and cooperation in the best possible way. It was co-founded by 7 energy technology companies who have global operations. Some of those partners are with us in this exact project, like for example Danfoss and Wärtsilä. And this is an expanding platform, so we are very happy to be expanding it, so to say, doing new solutions. And of course, the main idea here is to pilot and commercialize new solutions that then can be utilized and adopted for worldwide markets to really get that carbon handprint going. And what this platform is aiming for is system-level carbon neutral energy solutions. So large combined R&D budget, very large market, and very good potential for job creation as well. And we are very happy and honored to be able to work with these partners to build a better future. And I guess that pretty much wraps it up. And we're working for a clean and sustainable world. All right, questions, please. I think I can't ask a question from myself. So, Kati has the mic up.
Yes, thank you. How did you, at the first place, get this idea to have the CCU in your plant?
Very good question. When we started out looking into the options, and I think when we look into the long term, as we've heard already today, it's very important to capture carbon into long stage products. But the problem is that there isn't really enough of a market for those kind of solutions, because at the end of the day we are owned by 60 municipalities, or 6 companies who are owned by 60 municipalities, which in turn are responsible for each and every citizen. So we have to find an economical way to get the ball rolling, to get this process ongoing. And the best and most clear market where you can actually make this into a commercially viable operation right now in Finland already is CCU, and especially this fuel production. What we would like to see when we go further is both to expand this production to the level that the market is. Of course, we don't know how big the gas market is going to be, especially now that we have to decouple ourselves from Russian fuel sources much quicker. But also we see clearly a lot of demand for higher level and more long-term CCU products, like polymers, for example. So that could be the next stage of carbon recycling. And then also in the long term, I think we will also need this kind of storage solution, so CCS as well. So it's not really a question of either or, but both and all of these solutions working together. And of course, the mix will be different in case of each company who goes for this. Any questions from the chat or from the audience? All right, you made my job a little bit easier, even so to say. But let's make it harder, and let's go forward to the final stage and have a little bit of a discussion, because I have a few more questions for all of the participants here. So I will invite Kati to join me here on the stage. And then we also have our both our other speakers, Markus and Oras, online. Oh, that wasn't probably supposed to be going. Yeah, very good. So, very good. Let me see from my notes. Perhaps let's begin with the most obvious or biggest question in the room, so to say, the most urgent one. Post this war in the Ukraine and Russia's actions, this has of course changed everything overnight. And in many senses, I guess the horribleness of the war does also mean that the pace of this transformation will be more rapid, and it will go through, and maybe there is some kind of a silver lining for us at least. But do you see that there is a change in the role of waste to energy, this kind of energy source? Because now that everything's changed, I guess that our role might be changing as well. How do you see this?
I see that we need all those measures we can use, and the waste to energy is quite known area. So I think there is definitely a place there. I think the most of the efforts are done to circulate plastics, for instance, and make perhaps the waste plastics to another products or like that. But as we heard, there are all the time there are residuals that you have to burn. And for Finland, I think the situation is quite good, of course, in that sense. But in the globally, we have the problems there in the waste handling. With this urgent situation, I don't know if there is any influence on that. But of course, now everything is looked through very carefully, where Europe can get the heating for the next winter and winters after that. And of course, the waste is something that is already known how to burn it. But you can't build installation over a few months. So
Yeah,
that's the problem, of course, in the short term.
Indeed. Oras, further ideas, comments regarding this?
Well, even though much of the waste originates elsewhere, when it ends up in our hands, it is a domestic resource. And Citra actually released yesterday a working paper looking at measures to tackle the energy crisis we might have ahead of us. And one of the messages we have in that working paper is that we should prepare for the worst. And we might also have some very nasty scenarios ahead of us. And in that type of scenarios, really, the first thing you need to do is to secure the supply of energy. And for that, I think waste to energy can play an important role. I would just also piggyback on what Kati said about plastics. Now we are, of course, talking about resilience from the point of view of energy, and that's important, obviously. But in the longer run, I think we need to also start having a discussion about resilience when it comes to sourcing our materials. And currently, the European Union is very reliant on imported resources from other continents. And circular economy is definitely a way to address at least partly that issue and make sure that rather than importing new natural resources from other places, we can circulate the ones that we already have within our systems here in Europe.
Very good. Markus?
Yeah, of course, I support the points of the two former speakers, but I think also an important aspect is that those regions in Europe that has most landfills are also the regions most dependent on Russian gas. So they could tackle two problems in one. And if you have CCS with negative emissions, you could reach the climate targets in the same time. So we have like 3 in 1.
The perfect solution as long as the funding is there, so to say.
Yeah.
Maybe to follow up on this question, and a very good thing that you mentioned, Oras, here, the question of circular economy and preventing the increase, the continuous increase of residual waste, so to say. What kind of solutions can we do further in the value chain to make recycling easier? And I think this might also be a role for policies as well to create this kind of positive product value chains or loops.
Well, there's plenty of things, of course, we can do. If I focus on the later part of the value chain, closer to waste to energy, I think many facilities have been considering introducing mechanical sorting in some parts of the process to make sure that of the municipal waste that the plants get, we could still get more resources out of that for recycling. And then, of course, if your waste to energy facility already doesn't take the metals out of the ashes, that's something that we should definitely be doing, and to use the metals that end up in the ashes. And then I think, and this comes back to what Kati said earlier also, I mean, if we are going to start recycling the carbon from waste to energy plants, that is actually an incredibly valuable resource that can be used for a multitude of different purposes and uses. And you can imagine all kinds of chemicals and plastics and other products that you can manufacture using that carbon. So I think that's one very promising future prospect as well.
I think that's exactly the thinking that we also have here, and I think the question of plastics is especially important for Finland. We are lacking behind European goals, so to say, but also I think, as you said, we see a big role for recycling carbon in molecular form in the future, and the opportunities that provides, also in regards to the fact that the materials, when they arrive at our place, so to say, they might already be degraded, but once you utilize that carbon, then the world is pretty much open for you. How is the situation in Norway regarding material efficiency?
I think we do quite well on European scale when it comes to recycling, but of course, still much more needs to be done, and that's especially when it comes to plastic, as you say. Most of the fossil emissions come from plastic, and Oslo, where our plant is located, is one of the regions doing like most poor actually in Norway. Even though we have optical sorting at the Oslo's own plant, so and we get the waste from the city's own plant or recycling plant. So there's always more that could be done, and we of course we don't want to incinerate waste that should be recycled. So that's always what we try to advocate when we're speaking to European politicians, because they always say that we should recycle everything. And of course we support that, but that's utopia for foreseeable future. So then we need to keep the waste out of the landfills and the rivers and the sea. But I think it's an interesting question with CCU, because this is also something Fortum is looking into. The project in Oslo is purely CCS, but we have other projects both in Finland and in Denmark, where we're looking into creating first methanol and maybe later also new materials like plastic.
Indeed, the options and the opportunities are huge if we can grasp them. Here, actually, a very good mention about policies and also EU level issues. I would like to ask you, because of course we have a big shift in the way that the Union wants funding to find its source, and the kind of questions about the EU taxonomy are quite interesting for this sector as well. Presently, we know that of course the waste to energy industry isn't yet included in the taxonomy, at least, and there's a lot of different sectors that also would like to get in. How do you see the role of the taxonomy? How is it right now, and how could it perhaps be improved to make this transition more easy for the industries? Maybe we start with Kati this time.
Yes, with taxonomy, it's really interesting case, and it's really shows how detailed regulation can be. It started with I think the banks and institution ask for clearer rules to how to give the green loans, and they want to avoid the green washing there. And then the Commission take the proposal, their proposal, and start creating the taxonomy criteria. And of course, when you try to do something in a science-based, and then you have the politics there above of everything all the time anyway. So we saw what happened with the nuclear, which is totally free, emission-free, CO2-free energy source. So because some countries don't like it, so it wasn't at first place in the taxonomy proposal. And then it came with a very strict rules there. Now it's accepted in this delegated act. And now we have problems with the biomass and the forest maybe there in the taxonomy, and they are trying to make the criteria not only for the climate, but for the biodiversity and the other environmental and social taxonomy as well. So it's really difficult area, we are just hoping and saying, and please don't prevent investment in this approach. Don't make it so tight that nobody can't anymore have any kind of green financing, and that's the risks there. And if they would be just like voluntary criteria for banks, so that would be okay. But if they are like a obligatory regulation and they are politically made, so that's where the problem comes up.
Very relatable position, so to say. How does Sitra see the taxonomy, Oras?
Well, it's a bit of a can of worms, so I don't think we have been making a lot of official statements on that. I would perhaps just like to remind that what the taxonomy tries to do is to define what can be considered green. It doesn't mean that you can't invest in anything else, and I can guarantee that if you have a profitable project that doesn't fall under the taxonomy rules, you will be able to find finance for that on the financial markets also in the future. Perhaps my take on this would be to see the taxonomy more as a process rather than as an end result. You need to start somewhere, and then as we go along in our transition to a climate positive economy, I think it is fair that the criteria will have to get stricter over time. And I wouldn't worry too much about what the criteria will be next year, as long as we get the process started and then we continuously revise the rules as necessary so that they meet the requirements of the time.
So one could almost say that there might be a role for climate positive waste to energy within the taxonomy framework in the future. Now, what about Norway? You look it very close to the EU, but still a bit from the outside. How is your view on this issue?
We follow this issue very closely, and of course, Norway has put itself in this very strange position where it follows all the EU rules without having anything to say on it. So then it's up to the companies to influence. And of course, we are both Finnish/European and Norwegian companies, so we are a little bit of everything. So our colleagues, both in Finland and in Brussels, work very closely with CWEP, so the umbrella organization for waste to energy bonds, on the taxonomy file. And I think it's, as you said, this is not like what's going to be legal or not. Of course, waste to energy will still be legal, even if we fall outside the first round of the taxonomy. But our customers may not always see it like that. So that the customers are, when they're looking, should we get district heating or from a waste to energy plant, or should we get another heating source? And then they might end up choosing another heating source. So in that case, it's very important, but it's important that we have very stringent requirements and that they get stricter and stricter. And of course, as you said, I think we should have maybe a distinction in the future where CCS or plants with CCS is okay, but since that's the best available technology. But that should be when it's off the shelf, so that every plant could have it.
Indeed. Oras, you had a comment, I think.
Yes, indeed. This links back to some of our earlier discussions, and just I perhaps should have mentioned that earlier. I'm also involved in the local energy utility in my hometown of Tampere and follow the developments of the heating market also from that perspective. I mean, we see this increasing competition from especially heat pumps against district heating systems. And one of my points I've been trying to make is that whether you can make a credible argument in favor of district heating will in the future come down to the question of whether you can also provide carbon negative district heating. Because with heat pumps, at best, you can get to net zero. So you can provide your heating with zero emissions. And that's of course good. But if you introduce CCS into your district heating system and perhaps, for instance, use waste to energy and capture the biogenic carbon, you could in fact provide carbon negative heating to your customers, which is of course from a sustainability point of view even better than the heat pumps can ever deliver. So I think that is a unique selling point that CCS coupled with waste to energy can provide.
I think that's the exact same as we discussed with Markus earlier about the public perception of different energy sources, and I think this is quite a crucial issue as well when we move more and more towards seeing energy not as a utility but as a product, so to say. And actually, I think this is a very good issue to our point of view to also wrap up this discussion. So perhaps a very short comment to all of you or from all of you regarding social sustainability, so to say. When we're doing a big transformation like this, of course, it's going to create costs, it's going to create changes to the people, I hope, who are watching this and asking perhaps, why should we pay for this, so to say? Why sacrifice now? Some motivating words, perhaps. Let's begin with Kati.
Yes, that's very good point as social acceptance, and I think the companies has to explain to their customers very clearly and transparency if they ask more money or they offer something. I was asked yesterday that how this looked like. I was asked to pay €1.70 for renewable heating, for district heating, and if I pay this, so could I get something extra or what? And when I was checking that, so it was very unclear. It said that what is happening with this money, if they are producing more or if they are just producing what they are planning to produce and they are just collecting money. So you have to give the customers very clear picture if you're asking more money from them, so they know what they are paying for and they are willing maybe to pay it.
So customer is and will remain the king and the queen. Markus, what's your impression on this issue?
No, I agree, and like we have done some research lately in Oslo on the opinions of survey 1,000 people in Oslo and about their attitudes towards CCS and waste to energy, and if they would be willing to pay more for carbon neutral services. And I think the responses that we got were very positive. Like the majority will clearly pay more, like slightly more. Of course, there's always a limit, and that we have seen also with electricity prices this year. That people are getting angry when their wallets are getting emptier. But also that we need to take into consideration that local inhabitants are not afraid of having a carbon capture plant next to their house, for instance. And that also is surveyed. So I think we're between like 60 and 70% had no fear at all of having a carbon capture plant next to their house. And we were quite happy with that result. But I think it's important to take this question seriously, because maybe in Norway, people are not afraid of CCS, but in Germany, they will be very afraid of CCS. So different locations you need different measures, I think.
Indeed, and regarding the importance of Germany in the European decision-making and energy policies as well, it would be very good to see these kind of changes happening. I leave the final word to Horace, so please.
I think for acceptability, for years, my key argument was simply to say that if we fail at tackling the climate crisis, then the civilization as we know it will be at risk. Now I don't even have to make that argument anymore, because everyone in Europe knows that if we continue as we have been doing so far, every single day we will be sending money to Putin to fund his war on Europe. And that needs to change, and that needs to change very rapidly. And I think that has completely changed the picture on acceptability of the energy transition.
Very good. So to wrap up, decarbonization is a solution for sustainability, for the planet, and also for peace. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you from your inputs and your great presentations and comments and ideas regarding this. So my heartfelt thanks to you, and also to you in the audience and online also behind the cameras and the screens. Thank you from my part, and we hope to see you soon again.
Thank you.